And it's going to YouTube. Yep, great. And counting down in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I guess good day. Good day just covers the whole thing. And welcome to the Good, Bad, or Bullshit podcast. Random topics, unrehearsed conversation, and quality reviews. My name is Michael Hodgins. I'm one of your three hosts on this weekly podcast, along with Mr. Crofton Steers. Hello, Crofton.
Hello, Mike.
And, of course, the one and only Bo Schwartz. Hello, Bo.
Why, good evening, or good afternoon, or good day.
Or good day.
Yeah, I've gone down a path I don't know how to come back from. But good everything to everyone.
Yes.
What?
How are you guys doing today?
We're doing good. I think there's a pipe leaking in one of your houses. But anyways, I'm doing good. I just don't want to make sure your houses don't collapse. I'm on a 2-show day today, so I've been spent a lot of time talking. My jaw is a little sore, but I think overall, I'm doing good.
You're becoming a podcast maven.
Baron.
A maven. A mistress. One might say a mistress of podcasts.
Mistress. Well, maven, isn't that someone who's good at stuff?
Yeah, and not that there's anything wrong with women. I love women. And so maybe this is just a reflection of my my gender stereotyping. But isn't a maven a woman? Isn't it
I don't think
female
so.
of like a maverick or something?
I think it's just a descriptor.
I thought maven was a descriptor of a female person.
I bet you there was a superhero comic personality called Maven who was a girl. That's why that sounds like that would be.
There was also a wrestler called Maven. He sucked.
I guess he wasn't a maven of wrestling after all.
He was no good.
Well, what does maven even mean then?
It just means good at stuff, I think. Anyways, good on you for doing 2 podcasts in one day.
Yeah, I think I'm incorrect about that gender thing. I think it's gender neutral. I think I might be wrong.
I think you're wrong,
I don't want to look like a maven of idiocy.
I operate this podcast with the belief that you are wrong most of the time and that Mike is wrong a fair amount of the time.
So
what you just said I remind me of something. I saw this quote. It's a long quote, but the last bit of it is the salient part of it is basically just belief is the death of intelligence. And I was like, that's an interesting quote. It made me think about our conversation on atheism and religion and things like that. Because there's this assumption, this is the guy's further quote, that if you don't believe in, say, God, then you must believe in the converse.
With that statement, what about casual beliefs? Like, I believe I'm smarter than both of you. Did I just kill intelligence there?
I don't know. I thought it was an interesting idea. To believe something is just when you stop thinking about it. And I'm like, yeah, there might be some truth to that. I believe there is truth to that. Oh, no.
Yeah, there you go. You just wrecked yourself. Better check yourself before you wreck yourself.
There's capital B believe and there's small b believe, right? It's capital B that screws you.
And then there's being a maven of belief.
Okay, let's get to a random topic. That's what this show's all about.
Sure.
Well, you're the man with the random topic generator in his garage. We haven't talked about that in a few episodes. Just like to remind listeners that we receive our topics from a diesel-powered piece of automobile engineering that's been repurposed to become a random topic generator that Mike keeps in his garage. Do I have all those details right?
It is, and actually you should listen to our 100th episode extravaganza because there was an event that happened there, and it's been much harder to keep under control lately, but we're making do.
How have you been keeping it? Do you have it strapped to the side of the wall in the garage?
I feel like it's best if I don't say.
Oh, because if it gets out, it could learn what you're... Okay, all right.
No, just like ethical issues and stuff.
Well, it's next to his newborn son's...
Is it sentient? Is it not? I don't know.
Do we have robotics laws that deal with sentience? I don't think so.
No, we don't. That's why. I'm treading on shaky ground here within the captivity of this random topic generator.
Poor Ivan Hodgins is breathing in toxic fumes every night. Wow. Those are the ethical problems. He didn't have room.
He doesn't keep
for a
Ivan
room
in
for
the
his
garage.
kid and a room for his random topic generator. So they're bunking together
in the garage. Okay,
right.
I'm ready.
Well,
Let's
speaking
start it
of
up.
bunking together,
At least it makes heat.
Ugh. This is one of these weird ones, but anyway. Okay, the topic today is freedom.
freedom, 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 freedom.
Yes.
Freedom. Okay,
So,
stop me anytime. I'm waiting for one of you to get
well,
sick of me
yeah, I
singing.
thought, isn't there a George Michael song where he's like says that, and then it's, anyways, whatever.
I don't remember. I have the voice in my head going freedom.
There's
Okay.
always a moment where when Mike pulls out the topic where he's sort of like talking. It's almost like he milks it in front of us, where he's like, "Oh, it's always interesting when we get a topic like this one, which I haven't revealed to you yet." And then we're like, "Come on, just for fuck's sake, tell us what the
It's
name
fu-
of the
I've
topic."
noticed that as I get older, my brain has this way of starting to say things that are like the end of the sentence I should be saying. So, like, if I'm going to say a sentence, I will start with like the end part and then fill in whoever I'm talking to about what the context is after. It's not a good thing, but you'll notice it if you listen to the show that I tend to
Great
do that.
characteristic in a talk show radio personality.
It's like
podcaster.
not good, but I can't really help it. My brain just gets ahead of itself. So I'm like, I should just say topic is freedom.
Yeah.
And
Whatever.
I know one thing about freedom, guys. That freedom reigns.
Or that freedom isn't free.
What?
That's one of those.
I don't.
That's the one I was gonna say.
That's the one that, like, if you're like a military supporter, conservative, you're like, freedom isn't free.
Freedom isn't free.
This is one of these topics that's like, it sounds like, with all this rhetoric around sort of democracy and, the first world nations that we live in, are like the U.S. and things like that, that it's like a no-brainer. Freedom is good, and, why would you even talk about it?
Yeah.
But as soon as you kind of delve into the idea of freedom, you realize it's kind of a can of worms, in the sense that, like, what is it really? And really what we have is limited freedom in a sort of modern society. And I think we talked about that either when we were doing lawyers way back or something. I can't even remember. It might have been even police, but it was essentially, we live in a society which has freedoms and limits to freedoms, and that's a balance, right? So
I think when you're at the point where you have like 100+ episodes, you get to the point where you have to think back to what you said on other topics and how things interact together. Because we've done stuff like, very recently we did hierarchy, and we've done democracy. We done a lot of ocracies or achies or whatever on this show, and many of them
Monarchies.
are almost in opposition with the concept of freedom. So I have to be sure I'm not a total hypocrite, I have to think back on some of the stuff I've said. And I guess freedom, like, if we're going to define it, it is in terms of an individual freedom, it is the freedom to do whatsoever you choose to do with your life in this world that we live in. Would that be fair?
yeah, I think that's fair.
With no, and I used the word free, which is a word that comes out of freedom, but like
Without
to
restrictions.
take
There's
action
no one.
with no limits or restrictions.
Yes,
essentially.
exactly. There's no one telling you you can't do this. You're free to do whatever it is you want. And again, using free again, but no one is restricting your ability to do anything. That would be total freedom, right?
Right.
Right.
So we definitely are not, despite what our American neighbors would like to believe, and what a lot of us would like to believe, we are not in a country of total freedom.
What? America is all about freedom, son.
The land of the free. But no, there's clearly limitations in place, and I think that most normal, rational people would say that those limitations serve a need and a purpose and they would not necessarily be in opposition to the majority of the ones that are in place. So you have like you have kind of where that line of comfort is with the level of freedom that people are given. And I think you're seeing a lot of culture wars in the States, and we recently had a Canadian election where you had one party that was more based on individual liberties, and and two parties that were more based on sort of social democracy and that sort of thing. And you see these two sort of viewpoints that collide often, because if everybody is equally free to do everything, then that means that some of what they do may infringe upon somebody else or many people, and that's where freedom gets messy, and that's where it gets complicated.
Yeah, definitely. I've thought about this before when I have been traveling in quote unquote third world countries, or developing countries, I think is the more better way to say it these days, where have been like acutely aware that people who live in those countries, like say I've traveled in Indonesia. Indonesia is the most recent example, someplace I've been to, where I'm like, people here are a lot more free in some ways. And that is to say things like, if you want to like build a house, I think you can just kind of go build it. Whereas you can't do that in this country. You need to apply for a permit, see if you meet up with zoning, adhere to building code practices, etc. You can't just do it. There, I think you can pretty much just do it. Then you might have an earthquake, and here your house might stand up, and there it might crush you and your family because you didn't follow the. So that's like that's a good way to see like how that balance works, because I've always been aware that like you can do whatever you want. The rules of the road are like non-existent. People just do whatever they want, but their highway deaths, of course, are well higher. So there's a cost to freedom. Freedom, as we all know, isn't free. And,
Oh no.
but I mean, but those specific costs are things like. And I think the go-to example is kind of like, well, if I'm totally free, I'm just going to go around and, do whatever I want to whoever. I'll shoot someone if I feel like it because I'm free and no one can stop me. And then, well, okay, you've clearly got problems there.
Yeah, so, because I think we're introduced to the word freedom, and the concept, I think, Crofton, you were kind of defining it earlier, it's to sort of be without restraints or be without constraints, to not have to face consequences. And like the reality is, forgetting human law, there are natural laws that we do not have freedom from. If you do not eat, you die. If you stay out in climates that are inhospitable to you, you become more susceptible to infections and sickness, and you die. So we do not have freedom. Even at this moment, we are not free from certain things. When you take the idea of freedom to its extreme conclusion with respect to humanity's laws, our communal coexistence, it seems incredibly naive to like have this expectation, that there wouldn't be any constraints placed on cohabitation and living together, for the simple reason that you said, if I'm free, I should be free to kill whoever the hell I want. Well, that's, I can murder them, I can eat them, I can, do all the things people say in society I can't do, I shouldn't do. Because a commitment to the idea of freedom means exactly that I am free to do everything. But it's just not realistic at all.
I think when you were saying this, because it's really interesting, the points about the kind of natural laws that inhibit our freedom, and it occurred to me that this is probably the appeal of things like superheroes to some extent. Like, you think of Superman. He's essentially the freest being that you can imagine. He's free from the laws of gravity. He can do whatever. He's laser eyes. Like, he can do pretty much anything.
Laser eyes. It's not.
Yeah, you want to open a door.
The first example was great. The laser eyes seems like,
But I think that's
it's heat vision, actually. But keep going.
Whatever. The point is, he is essentially the most free being you could, or thereabouts, or you could pick other superheroes, or
his powers in particular are the most like.
But he basically can't be killed, right? Like
immune to laws of the universe.
Right, but just it doesn't even really matter who you choose. You could
Okay.
be the Silver Surfer.
Okay.
Who cares? The point being is, if you were a being like that and you lived on this planet, and you're the only one who's really free, you could adhere to laws enacted by governments or not, because the consequences can't really affect you. You sort of can choose what to do, and that's sort of ultimate freedom. And if you're considered to be good, you choose to acknowledge them, but you have the freedom not to, because any consequences are essentially meaningless if you're invincible. It's like being God. Like God would be free.
Except God is a different concept, but
Well,
in theory, the fictitious idea of God is that he lords over everything and nothing is lord over him, as far as I can.
Well, yeah.
And, and often, like
He's free.
in ways to try and make Superman interesting, people do portray him as a god and that sort of thing. God choosing to live among men.
Yeah,
But
kryptonite.
I think that freedom, like when you talk about it as a concept, you're talking about something that is loaded with essentially positive meaning by everybody, like the masses. When you say the word freedom, like I strive for freedom. We're trying to bring freedom to this country, or we are trying to enable people to be free. That's always considered a positive. Nobody is saying it as a negative, and if they are, they're probably a dictator speaking to their private security council or whatever. What, we want freedom? What is this?
Yeah.
America?
Well, that's a super valid point, and I was gonna bring this up a little bit earlier, and you basically touch on it there, which I think is like there's the freedom gets bandied about as this kind of absolute, like we all want freedom, and then pretty clearly we've established it doesn't really exist. But I think mostly because it's freedom from something, right? So it's
Right.
like freedom from a dictator, or freedom from a 80-hour work week, or
Freedom
whatever
from
it may be.
enslavement. There's various cultures throughout
Absolutely,
life
yeah.
have
All these
had
types of
slaves.
things.
And so the desire for freedom is very specific. That's your
The lottery in this country, Lotto 649, the big one slogan is just imagine the freedom. Like essentially,
freedom
and a
from a
lot of
40-hour
lotteries
work
are named
week.
like freedom. They talk about retirement, they talk freedom 55, or freedom 65, or freedom whenever you can retire. But yeah, Mike's right. All those things are. It feels like even as a free person, you're limited in certain ways, and you can become ever more free through financial independence and that sort of thing.
Political power, or whatever, whatever it may be.
money and political power kind of go hand in hand too. Like there's being free from your job by winning the lottery, and then there's being very wealthy and being able to influence lobbies and things like that. Like be at the helm of those things.
Well, it's interesting, and I feel we talked about sort of capitalism on the show, and debt and other things like that. But it's clearly a valid point that people who are rich enjoy much more freedom than the rest of us, because
absolutely.
you can just do whatever you want. It's like, well, if you have $1 billion, you can choose to be like, well, I'll never work again and just spend my life on like white sand beaches with people waiting on me hand and foot. You could choose to do that, or you could be like, well, I want to change the world. I want to invent an electric car like Tesla. He was independently wealthy from a previous business thing, and then he's like, I'm going to start this company. And you could have a good idea, and if you have tons of money, you could do it. But if you don't have that, then you basically cannot. You're not free to do that. You can maybe try to beg people who have the freedom to help you, but really, if you will, a lot of us have good ideas, but they don't necessarily go anywhere because we don't have the freedom to see them into existence.
The freedom concept is one that when you think about what you're trying to become free of, as sort of like a reactive to something else, that's when you sort of can easily give a verdict, such as on this show, as to determining if it's a good thing. If you're under a political dictatorship, you might be like, oh, obtaining freedom over this is a good thing, whereas obtaining freedom over working, and again, it's like individuals versus everyone. So like, well, what you might want for your own individual freedoms, what happens if that freedom, those same freedoms are applied to apply to everyone. And I think that therein lies the balance. So when Mike is talking about freedom of sort of somebody who's able to, a rich person, robber baron who's able to sit on white sand beaches or whatever, you think back to like early 1900s or something, and you've got these giant industrial revolution type factories with people working, more hours than you can even comprehend for a barely amount of food to live. And they are essentially enslaved, and meanwhile, the owners of said companies are free to do whatever they want in the world. But they might think, oh, I can vote for the prime minister, or I can vote for whomever, so I am free. And I think when you look at a lot of pop culture and movies like The Matrix and stuff like that, are criticizing what is freedom. And that's why it's such a tough thing to lock down, because we did an episode on anarchy, and if you argue that is total freedom of the individual to do whatever, well then that comes with the ability to step on other individuals' freedoms, right?
It is interesting, and this is actually kind of ties in because having learned slightly more about anarchy since we did that episode, not a lot more, but somewhat more. I think people who talk about anarchy as an alternative model to structure things. I think also it's that, so you might have much more freedom, but I think the idea is that you also have more responsibility, and that would be the same as applied to the kind of the superhero sort of idea of freedom, that you have all this power, but you also have a lot of responsibility, and the idea that the more power or freedom you're given, now you're more responsible for your actions in the world. And then I guess that's maybe part of the issue, is that can you trust individuals to be responsible all the time? And we've talked about laws and why we have laws and police and things like that. And often it comes down to the fact that you can't trust some people to be responsible with too much freedom because they'll abuse it. So that's why we have limited freedom.
Like, be responsible to, I don't understand. Be responsible to who? Like, who gives them these responsibilities? Like, who's assigning them these responsibilities?
That's the idea. When people that have put forth the idea, like the philosophy of anarchism is not one of like, okay, it's complete chaos, I do whatever I want. It's like a structure whereby there's no government necessarily, but maybe there are ways about which individuals solve their problems with each other. You don't have like a structure imposed by law or something, but that there are maybe conventions that are adhered to, and that it's your responsibility to adhere to them. I'm not an expert on anarchy, but it's something along those lines. But it's the idea that you have, if you have a lot of freedom, you're in a way more responsible for your actions. Like superhero, Spider-Man. With great power comes great responsibility.
The thing that has to do with, because we did an episode on hierarchy, I think, and this is from watching. This is, again, I'm not an expert on anarchy either, but this is the show where no one's an expert on anything, and yet we talk about it. I was watching some Noam Chomsky, and like the anarchy and things like that have to do with decentralizing power, have to do with flattening that idea that in our community there are people who dispense justice, and there are people who obey or are on the receiving end of it and get no say in what justice looks like. So like the idea being that, what if you lived in a community where there was no systems of power, there were no people whose wishes, even within a limited scope, supersede your freedom. So if the government of Canada decide I go to jail and cite some reason, I go, or I get hunted down. Like I don't have a say in this, because of the power is assigned there, and we trust in that system to organize and keep our community safe. But I think the idea with anarchy is just that there is no power. We get together as a community and deal with these things. There isn't somebody who's better than me in this group, and that is hard to have. It seems like paradoxical to have rules and tenets and yet have nobody able to enforce them.
But I mean, I think that's why it comes back to responsibility. And but another way to look at, because we were talking about like sort of Well, the point I was making about like developing countries often seeming more free in a lot of ways, and also seeming a lot more chaotic. Another way to view it is that part of the reasons maybe we have these laws is to ensure certain types of freedoms, like for example, like what's one? Like the building code issue. Maybe you enact building codes, and now, okay, you feel less free to go and build a house however you want or whatever, but you are more free to live a safe life. So your house is not going to fall down on you, or something like
What about
socialized healthcare.
real estate, dude?
What?
Let's say we don't know each other, and I put a tent up in your front yard and say, "This part of the earth, I'm gonna hang out here." The law recognizes your property, your ownership, and so you have the right to contact things to enable me to be moved off of your land.
Right, but my point was more about how some free like some of these laws in some ways guarantee certain types of freedoms, but then restrict others. So, like, the other point I want to make was, like, say, socialized healthcare versus something like taxation. So we pay higher taxes, and you say, oh, my personal freedom to spend money how I choose is not there. But then the freedom that you enjoy because of that is that your health will probably be better, and you can have access to medical care in a more free way. You don't have to spend your money to do it. So it's this kind of balance, like, also with the kind of society we live in, which there are a lot more laws which seem like they restrict your freedom, but in some ways, like, I mean, we're freer from, say, vehicle or car deaths because there are more laws to restrict rules of the road and how cars are built than there are in some other places.
Yeah, you're not allowed to text and drive. Like, think about how weird that is.
It's not free.
Since like the 1950s, pretty much, and the rise of no, earlier than that, but the rise of communism, socialism in Russia, and that sort of thing, it has just ended up being painted in such a way that it is seen as a negative. The McCarthy trials in the 50s, they would hunt down anybody who was believed to be a communist sympathizers or a socialist sympathizer, so even though times have changed and people think in different ways, that is still left over as sort of, especially America as the main superpower in the world. People still see looking at the collective as opposed to the individual as a negative, and individual freedom is seen as a positive. Like, these are not. I'm not saying that that's true. I'm just saying that this is the perception that exists outside. Like, if you see a Hollywood movie, it is probably more likely to be about a hero that enjoys a tremendous amount of individual freedom, and it is fighting for individual freedom as opposed to trying to institute some sort of social safety net or something for a collective group. That's just not how it's seen. It's seen in a negative light, and I think that's the problem when thinking about freedom. Because you ask me, Crofton, do you want freedom? And I would say, oh, absolutely. Do you want the freedom to be able to say, tell off your boss? I'd be like, oh yeah, for sure. Do you want the freedom to be able to do whatever you want? I'd be like, yes. Do you want to have the freedom to defy the law of gravity? I'd be like, I'm all over that. You give me all that, but then ask me, can your buddy Bo hurts his leg, and you're in this society where you have all these individual freedoms, and he's there with his injured leg. There's no sort of medicine, or there's no whatever. Everybody's got all the individual freedom that they want. Do you want to help Bo, or do you want him to just like limp on the side of the road until his leg rots off and then he eventually dies of gangrene? I'd be like, I would like to help Bo. And then that becomes a slippery slope, because the next thing you know, it's like, well, I would also like there to be a smooth road to walk on, and I would also like there to be. And at one point, you reach a balance, I guess, between individual freedoms and socialism, or social, a redistribution, not a total redistribution of wealth, but like a sort of a better balance. I would argue we have it better here in terms of balance than they do in the States. They would obviously argue the opposite. So yeah, it is totally complex and a totally loaded term, freedom.
Yeah.
It really is, and it's funny when you were touching on like, I would take all these freedoms if you offered them to me, and I do feel that that's like a basic thing of like, especially if we look at freedom like as we're always moving towards in some ways more of it, freedom from monarchy. There's more democracy in the world. You have a say in political stuff. You don't have to work 80-hour weeks at horrible pay. There's minimum wage. Those are all things that are arguably in favor towards more freedom to individuals. And I would say that for me personally, I would also be like, yeah, and I want more of it. So when I think of like democracy, it's like, oh yeah, democracy. Like we just had an election in Canada and everyone's all high on happy on democracy. And I always think about it as like
they're just high on Justin Trudeau's sweet good looks.
Well, yeah, he's a very handsome man. But like you get to say something once every 4 years, and everyone's like, "This is so wonderful." And yes, we recently did democracy on the show. I thought it was a very interesting conversation. It's better than monarchy or dictatorship, certainly, but could it be better still? And I'm the type of person I'm like, yeah, I'd like more say in stuff. I want more freedom to be involved in politics beyond just bugging my MP to do something or other. I'd like more direct say. And in the same way that, like, yeah, you work mostly a 40-hour work week, and there was this thing going around the internet where it was like Sweden moved to like what did they move to? Like a 6-hour workday. And
that's awesome. Wow.
Yeah, exactly. Most people are like, that's amazing because it's like, oh, you got high enough wages and you work a 6-hour workday. That's more freedom to personal freedom. And I'm like, yeah, I want that. And I also don't want to be poor, right? I want to have good wages for the time I do work. So does like everyone. We all want more of it. But like, is there enough freedom to go around? Like, because it's just.
Well, it sounds like maintain freedom. Freedom, I don't know, what is it, like societal freedom or political freedom, or I don't know what the freedom type is, but the concept of freedom beyond the pure literal, very specific definition is a balancing act. It doesn't seem like, yeah, all we got to do is go all the way to the extreme and achieve freedom, and that there's resistance for this freedom by dummies. It's actually, usually everything comes at a cost. And you have to weigh what the cost is versus what you're doing it. So like if you're talking about some of the things you're talking about, which is like, I want to work 6 hours a week. Well, if we scale back on labor standards, maybe there is a consequence to it. Maybe we don't have the types of workers here that are going to do inexpensive labor, and a lot of the modern conveniences we enjoy, we have to start doing without. So no more iPhones, because guess what? Those get made in a place where people get paid nothing. Like, and so like, they free? Like, what is our freedom cost? It's like, guess what? People at Foxhound? They have
Foxconn.
Foxconn. Foxhound is from Metal Gear Solid, I think. Confirmed. Thank you, Carl. So Foxconn, like the slave factory, basically, where people commit suicide because it's so cramped and the conditions are so bad, are what. We have these great iPhone devices that everyone has for. It's like, there's kind of blood on our hands. And like, I'm wondering, there's a new Steve Jobs biopic coming. They're going to celebrate how great he is. I wonder if they're going to talk about what a slave master is. Because like,
it's not just like, yeah.
So my point was, I'm off track. I'm way off track. The point was that
bring it home, Bo. Bring it home.
Freedom is a balancing act, and it's not immediately evident that the great sounding stuff doesn't come at a cost somewhere else. And that's the big conversation we're all trying to be engaged with or unplugged from, is what's has value, what's important to us, and what isn't.
Well,
in terms of
I mean, I think it's a good point when you talk about, and as much as I started off by saying in Indonesia, they have a lot more freedom in some respects, and in a lot of respects, they're really, we're certainly better off here, generally in Canada than most people are in Indonesia. They're working at very low wages, probably working a lot more. Yeah, they can go build a ratty house if they want to without going to through the bureaucracy and having that kind of personal freedom. But what's that balance is a really good point. And I also think that it's kind of tied in people. If freedom was more the issue as opposed to say just wealth distribution, that kind of like that 99% in wealth inequality debate, which is ongoing and has been since the 2008, is kind of related to that because it's a really good point to say that we in Canada and the States and most of Europe live a very free, what feels like a free lifestyle, high wages. We can go on trips, we can do all this stuff because other people in other parts of the world are less free, essentially. And those of us in this were complaining about the 1%, they're billionaires, as we talked about earlier. They're clearly the most free people. And the reality is, like, when you talk about wealth distribution, if it was reframed a bit more like, hey, we all want more freedom. You guys are hogging it all. It's shared a little bit. It's not all about money, but certainly it's in the way the world is structured. Money is part of it, and so. But if you were to reframe it as opposed to just being money and be like, yeah, we want to share freedom. More people would be more free to enjoy their lives and do things. And a good way to do that is to have
money.
More money.
Money stops being money and starts being power at a certain point.
Well,
that's what
it's like yeah. Well, it's I get in my private jet and fly across the ocean whenever I want to. Yes, there's added freedom to having wealth, and I think it's pretty self-evident when you say it. However, Mike, what Mike was touching on there that rang a bell with me, and this is sort of my personal pet peeve with freedom, is and we were making jokes off the top of the show about like certain slogans with regards to freedom, but I don't like how it is a word that is essentially being co-opted, and the positive connotations that I mentioned has been co-opted and given a certain amount of power to sort of settle discussions. Because yes, freedom is being kept out of the 1% conversation because it would be it's such a valuable word and it's been given so much cachet and so much power, it would totally reframe that conversation if used appropriately. Instead, it's used like, and you see the dysfunction in the United States right now with Congress, and you have extremes on both sides of people. It's a nation almost divided in half right now, and on one end you have sort of people who are gripping onto the concept of individual freedom, and they always use it. They use it to justify everything. Like a school shooting happens, it's like, oh, you can't take our guns away because that's part of the Constitution and that's our freedom, and freedom, freedom, freedom. And we're going to relabel our French fries in the cafeteria freedom fries because we hate the French today. It's just like it's just become such a stupid thing where they just take the word and romanticize it, idealize it, pick and choose everything and then throw it up in everybody's faces to justify everything they're doing. We're bringing freedom to this country. You don't do that. Like, I mean, it's just the word has now reached a point of ridiculousness, I find. And when Mike drew it off the beginning of the show, the first thing I almost eye rolled because I just like, I've heard it so many times for so many ridiculous reasons that are not inherent to what it is. We literally had to boil it down to what it is and start thinking about the individual versus the collective and all that. These are not conversations people generally have. They generally are just like, freedom, freedom good. You don't like freedom,
Yeah.
you're stupid, and it drives me nuts.
Absolutely, I 100% agree with that. And it is interesting how it has been, the whole concept of it. And as us personally have talked about, like, we want more freedom. Who doesn't want more freedom? But it's been that word has been like hijacked by conservatism, basically, and the right of the political spectrum. They use it all the time. But if you were to be like, and maybe people on the kind of left and should be trying to reframe and retake back that word to be like freedom from poverty. And you do hear stuff like that sometimes, but it's not. Again, there's so many ways to frame it.
It's funny how the right gets that word, and yet they can be like pretty much openly homophobic.
Right. Exactly. And it's stuff like you could say like there's so many ways, and this issue goes so many different ways. I mean, and the right, it's like you can find the hypocrisy in their use of it all over the place.
One thing to not just to pile on the right, because this is a hypocritical thing, but it's an example worth noting. It's partly the branding of things, but abortion. So on abortion, the two sides, the two ways that they frame the arguments are, on one side you have pro-life. So who's not for life?
Anti-life.
Are you anti-life? And then there's freedom of choice. Who's not for the freedom of choice? Are you anti-choice? Are you anti-freedom? You know, like, so it is funny how they, you know, movements brand themselves, and freedom is one of those words.
It's a super like politicized word in that way, and then when you break it down, you realize that we all have some freedom and a lot of not freedom. You know, like
what you can never establish. I think this is correct. You can never actually have a state of freedom. Like, you
complete
can never
freedom?
be
Well, no.
in a state. You will never be in a state of freedom in a pure sense of the word. So, like, it's definitely manipulating people's understanding of what the word means to say, like, vote for me and you'll be free from the tyranny of whatever.
Well, what if you were an atom?
An atom?
You're not alive then.
But you would be free, right?
Atoms aren't free. Only radicals are free.
Oh, science!
Oh,
joke.
science slam! Boom! Get out of my teacher's office or whatever.
But it is an interesting one. Like, 'cause I thought about this a lot recently when I've been reading a lot about kind of like the way economics work and being annoyed at the kind of current system and not liking my current sort of 9-to-5 lifestyle. It's a bit different now. I don't like that. It doesn't feel free. And I was like, you know, and reading some stuff about sort of fairly recent history, people in this country, when people arrived, are kind of like farming homesteaders, right? And it's like, and in some ways they had a lot more freedom. But then, you know, when you bring up the reality of it, most people are like, you wouldn't want to live really like how they were living. It's like, sure, they're free in some ways to grow their own food and starve if there's a crop failure or whatever. And yeah, you don't work in blocks of 40-hour weeks. You work a lot in the harvest and the planting, and maybe you don't work so much in other times of the year. You do different things, and that seems appealing to me, but I also realize there's also hardships that go with that. And again, this comes down to the fact that this whole thing is really this balancing act of you can't just, you have to do something, right? Like,
Nope.
you know, initially when this came up, I'm like, what were the most free people in history? I'm like, it was probably like our caveman ancestors who are just like, yeah, there's no laws, there's no rules. I'm just gonna go out there and kill a wildebeest and eat it, and no one's gonna tell me what to do.
Paint on those cave walls. I'm gonna paint on every cave wall.
I'm gonna paint everywhere. You know, I'll mate with who I want to mate with. I'll war with who I want to war with. But the reality is, they probably lived short, hard lives, and ultimately they still had to work a lot at something, gathering food and hunting, and it was certainly difficult. We probably enjoy a lot more freedom in the way we use that word than they.
Well, we talked about this on another episode, and I'm sure it was on Cosmos as well, but you know, settlements, like the rise of agriculture is what gave the rise to leisure time in our development, right? Like, if from sun up to sundown, all you're worried about is like, when are we gonna eat again? Like, that's, you know, natural laws. We're not free from natural laws. That's what's driving
interesting
us.
Is
we
I
are free
also heard of it.
Laws.
It is super interesting to be like, yeah, that's what gave us sort of freedom and leisure time, is permanent settlements and agriculture. Also, what gave us hierarchies, or well, some types of hierarchies, power dynamics, and the ability of a few to oppress the masses. That's something that also came with agriculture and permanent settlements. It didn't exist before, apparently, according to anthropologists, or at least some anthropologists, because people would just leave if you didn't like someone who was a jerk. Once there was like permanent settlements, you know, you're like, well, you know, Bob has all the grain, Bob has all the power, and what can you do about it?
Well, that's where communal laws are there,
because
the other thing you could do is just kill Bob, right? Like,
well,
I don't like the way Bob's looking at me, and he's got grain. I'm just gonna fucking kill that
but then
guy.
you go to kill it, and then Bob's like, hey, Steve, you want some sweet grain? You got to go kill Gary, and he's gonna be like, yes, I'll do it, you know, and then you got the problems of today.
Yeah. Welcome to, you know what, history, we should just teach history. We should do a podcast on history, and it'll be 2 episodes long.
We probably shouldn't do that.
No, all right. But we're going to do one on Canadian politics.
Okay, I think we bring in the farm animals. Are you guys ready to do this?
Yes.
Order, I say. Order in the court.
I will say I love that we have a kazoo in a prominent place on the show.
We have the freedom to do that, Bo.
We do.
It's a free instrument. You don't need talent to play it.
It's free from talent.
Practice required.
Free from practice. There you go.
I have a prediction about these verdicts. I think I know how they're going to go.
I think I know too.
All right, I'm going to start then, so I don't look like I'm...
All right.
Okay. I'm going to get it right out of the bag right now. Freedom's bullshit. It just so clearly is. Like, once you disentangle the political nonsense caught up in the word freedom and acknowledge that, like, you know, it's freedom from certain things, or that certain things are bad and that we have more freedom now and that's good, whatever. In the end, you can't have absolute freedom. It just leads to all kinds of problems. It's a balancing act, and we hear the word and it's like, we want it. I want freedom, ultimate freedom. And I just think the whole concept is total BS. And no, I'm for more for personal freedoms, and I feel like we need a better way to define how we measure those things other than the word freedom, because I feel like I'm contradicting myself in my verdict. But yeah, I just really think it's a BS thing. You can never be totally free, as you said, Bo. I agree with that. It doesn't really exist a state of true freedom. And really what we should be trying to focus on is quashing oppression and those types of things, instead of focusing on this kind of nonsense ideal of freedom, because it doesn't exist. So yeah, I think it's bullshit.
All right, Crofton.
Yeah, I'll go. I can go second. So, all right. I also think it's bullshit. So let's get that out of the way right off.
Starting to stink in here.
Freedom is bullshit. So Bo made a really good point at the beginning when he brought in the laws of nature and how we're never free from those. So there's laws of man and there's laws of nature, and in many ways the laws of man allow us freedom from certain parts of the laws of nature. When Mike gave examples in old-timey days of people, harvest, free to build houses wherever they want, but not able to like get enough crops to live. They were limited by having to eat, where we can just go to the grocery store and the supply and demand will feed us pretty much no problem, as long as we have the money to pay for it. So, I mean, I do see these one set of laws almost helping us to become free from the others. We have more laws of man now than we've ever had in history. And Mike mentioned that the most free we would have been from laws of man would have been in the time of cavemen, where we would be the most vulnerable to the laws of nature, probably. So, and then you start thinking about, okay, so these two sets of laws are in conflict. Freedom is an absolute, and everybody knows only the Sith deal in absolutes. So it's a situation where you can never really reach that point, nor would you really want to if you knew what it entailed. And it's about finding the line. And do we care about each other? Do we only care about ourselves? And you see this in politics, and it comes up all the time. So finding that line of personal freedom versus collective freedom versus collective safety net and all that sort of stuff is a tough challenge for humanity. And I'm brainwashed into loving the word freedom or wanting my own personal freedom. I gave an example of wanting all these things, and like, if you offered me the freedom, I would take it. But at the same time, as I said, it's a term that has been reappropriated, it's been bastardized, it's been used to sell things that are in no way related to freedom. There's been laws that have the word freedom in them that really have nothing to do with freedom, that are about creating entirely new systems. It's just like while freedom itself is an absolute, it has reached the point where the term freedom is the least thing, the furthest thing from an absolute possible. It's murky, it's crappy, it's bullshitty. And we're never going to get to this ideal point. So let's just get to the point where we can all live together, not infringe on each other's freedoms, and enjoy our own personal freedoms to the point that they don't infringe on others. So for that reason, I got to say it's bullshit. Big crap bullshit.
All right. So it's my turn now.
We're listening.
So I'm going to deliver mine at the end.
Oh,
It's not going to be as long as Crofton's. But here's the thing. I'm a big fan of the Matrix movies. And in particular, the second Matrix film. And I know a lot of you out there are going, what the hell? The first one's a good one. The two sequels were terrible. Let me tell you, the best moment was when he goes to the source. Spoiler alert, if you haven't seen it, then, you know. He returns to the source, and the big revelation in that film is that it's not the first time, you know, there was a one, and that this sort of drama of revolt played out. In fact, it was like the fifth or sixth time, and it was just another iteration that the computer program had already accounted for and was prepped. So he says that the problem is choice, and that if they're able to predict outcomes, they're able to, you know, control things. And so you may operate in a lot of ways in life and believe that you are making those free choices, yet they're chosen for you, right? We've all sort of had that experience or thought about the world in terms of, oh, I'm freely exercising my choice, only to realize that I'm a product of all the influences I had growing up and my parents' emotional issues or whatever experiences I had, that I'm not really as free an individual as I would like to think, that my ego would like to believe that I am. And so, what's the verdict on freedom? I think that we are defined by our resistance to control, even in situations where the world is controlling us. And I think that we need to continue to fight to a point where we can be free. And I think we're limiting our imaginations to our daily life now, where it's like, it's not realistic to be free because of X and Y. There are ways that we're going to evolve, and part of that is solving the problem. Why can't we break nature's laws? If I can not live in my body and be part of the hive mind, then I don't have to eat. And then I can start breaking some natural laws and start attaining freedom. And why do I have to be defined by the way humanity is now versus the way that we're trying to fight? I think I think many of our identities are, you know, characterized by that futile fight against tyranny, against lack of choice. I believe in freedom, even when the rug gets ripped out from underneath me and I'm not free. I'm going to say freedom is mother beeping good. Yeah, go freedom, America.
Wait, there was a second Matrix movie?
Yeah, Matrix
Reloaded. It's better to just pretend it didn't get made.
What, next you're going to be telling me there was a fourth Indiana Jones?
No, there isn't. Bo, the funny thing about your verdict was when you were going on about it for a while, I was almost going to say like, oh, freedom is bad. He's going to say freedom is bad. You were almost convincing me the other way, because when you were saying things like that we didn't even get into, of like, you know, you're influenced by culture, by people, all our thoughts. I'm like, wow, we're even further from freedom than I thought, and I said it was bullshit. But yet somehow you came up with the nonsensical view that it was good.
The link is that we struggle for it, even when it's futile.
We struggle for it, but if anything, you're making the point that it's even more of a myth than than Crofton and I were touching on. It's even more of a myth. It's just anyways.
I believe it's a worthwhile fight, but yeah, it's depressing.
My prediction wasn't quite on, but I always forget that Bo's a bit of a wild card.
I'm free, baby. You can't pin me in. You can't
no, he's free to be all over the place.
I knew that's why he wanted me to go last.
Yeah, he wanted to.
Once it was clear that we had said the same thing, I knew.
I would have messed up your verdict, Crofton. Like you would have been like, "Oh, I don't know. You both make good points."
Nah, he would have still said bullshit. Anyways, okay, listeners, if we missed some major thing on this discussion of freedom, please let us know. Send us an email, goodbadbull@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd gladly read your email on the air. You can send us a tweet also at goodbadbull. And if you are on Facebook, you can like us there if you do indeed like us. And to listen to the show, you can find us at our web. All the information on our website, goodbadbull.com. You can find links to Stitcher and iTunes to subscribe, and we would like it if you did subscribe and get involved, participate in the discussion. You know, we're certainly not the arbiters of truth here. We're always open to being proven wrong, told off, and corrected.
Yeah, get at
So
your
please-
boys, because doing that is on fleek.
Yes, what Bo said. And guys, if our listeners want to get in touch with one of you individually, say Crofton, where can our listeners find you?
Well, they're free to tweet me on Twitter at Crofton Steers.
And Bo?
You can find me at Bo Schwartz, where you can find out all about what I've been up to in the free world of podcasting.
And you can find me taking the red pill. Which pill is the freedom pill?
I think it's red pill, the waking
Whatever.
up pill. Yeah.
The one where you go down the tube and then there's no Twitter anymore because the reality sucks. Or you can tweet me at ML Hodgins, whatever.
If he takes the wrong pill by accident.
Yeah, I'd be like, which pill is it? Blue? Oh, whatever. I guess it's not so bad in here.
The actual secret behind the pills is that they're both the same pill, because you've already made the choice that you made, and it's just a ruse.
You're like a spoiler machine.
Oh no,
I
that's conjecture. That's not in the movie. That's just my deep philosophical analysis of the Matrix films. Sorry, Crofton.
I think I've only ever watched the second and third Matrix films once, and it was in theaters.
You need to watch them again. They are good.
No, man,
They're so
the first
good.
one is really, I think, a brilliant piece of science fiction.
I've seen that one a lot of times. I've seen
It's
it maybe
good.
like 6 times.
The other ones become kind of stupid, I don't know, fluffy nonsense, I think.
They have their shortcomings, but I definitely there's things about it I really liked.
It's more that the first one is less ambiguous. It's got a clear story to tell. It's told well, and it makes its point well. And they're like, hey, it's good. It's well, you know. The other ones are like they're a bit all over the place, trying to do too much and be a bit too smart for their own. That's my view.
I like the only the Sith deal in absolutes as well.
Yeah, it was a good one.
Because it's such an absolute. You know, like it's like only Russians deal in absolutes or whatever. Like it just it's such,
You just
it's
proved
such-
yourself.
It's like, what, am I a Sith now?
I'd like
Yeah.
to point out that you're quoting from episode 3, and you've shat on the original series a couple of times.
Oh yeah, but the
So
dialogue's
I
horrible.
need to call you out on that, sir. You need to decide if you're going to be supportive of the original trilogy or not.
Wait, I'm supportive of the original trilogy. Episode 3 is the prequels.
Yeah, prequels.
That's
but
sorry.
that's the
That's
one
what
with
I
the,
mean.
like, the
Sorry,
Sith
the
deal
origin
and-
story things. Yes, the prequels. Sorry. Yes.
So that only the Sith deal in absolutes was from the prequels?
Obi-Wan Kenobi says that the moment Anakin, he's trying to talk to Anakin, they're having the saber fight, and he says something absolutist, and then he's like, "Psh, only the Sith deal in absolutes.
Well,
You
not
are
quite.
too far
And
gone."
then he says, he says only this is deal in absolutes, and then he makes some statement which sounded so obnoxious because it's Obi-Wan Kenobi. It didn't seem right. Where he's like, "I believe in democracy," and I was like,
When he says that, that can't be right.
It seems Star Wars.
He believes in freedom.
Like he believes in democracy, but then 30 years later, when he meets Luke Skywalker, he cuts off a man's arm in a bar. He's like,
Well, it is
like,
Mos
"I believe in
Eisley."
democracy. Also, don't fucking cross me. Or I'll
He also believes
burn
in the
your
right
arm
to
off."
bear arms. Get
Yeah,
it?
he's an anarchist. I
Bear
think he's an
arms?
anarchist.
Whatever.
Obi-Wan.
Yeah, I feel like Star Wars is like an anarchist sort of view of the galaxy.
It's a fascist view, right?
Well, there's some, but there's also
the Empire's
Yeah.
a fascist state.
It is, but you can also just not live in one of those systems. You can live in Tatooine, enjoy more freedom, but it's hard to get a good meal because it's all freaking desert.
It's true. The moisture
balance.
farming only gets you so far.
Whereas you can live on Corsica or whatever and be like, sweet.
Coruscant.
Coruscant. Good lord.
I thought there was another one. What's Corsica?
Oh, Corsica might be a planet
How about
name,
Corellia
but-
then? Corellia.
I think Corsica is an actual Greek island.
Yeah, well, Corellia is a planet.
Yeah, I know. It
Star
makes
Wars
it's where the Millennium Falcon. I think Han Solo is Corellian, actually.
Yeah, that's what I thought as well. And they make a lot of spaceships in Corellia.
It's true. Well,
I'm not
guys-
talking
you
the
guys-
local bulk freighters. I'm talking the big Corellian ships. She's fast enough for you, old man. We're nerds.
You guys